Hi, Puneet.
Hi, Simi. How are you?
Good, good. So last week we talked about why it would be important to get on a spiritual path. So thought this week we could discuss, okay, if someone decides they're ready to start this path, where do they begin?
hmm Yeah, I mean that is the question, isn't it?
Hmm.
There's so many different options and choices, and I think the first thing potentially is to do some window shopping, and try a bunch of different methods, different traditions. Um, I can speak from my experience. I was particularly attracted to meditation. I felt like it was more suited to my mind, and more I was able to like sit quietly. I enjoyed sitting quietly and meditating. At the beginning, I obviously didn't know what meditation was, so there was a lot of trial and error, and internet searching and trying to do it on my own. Um, but I- but just like stepping back a bit, all of spiritual practice is some form of self learning, isn't it? Like we are trying to get an understanding of how we experience the world, what kinds of thoughts that we have, how we respond to certain situations. um, Start to even notice that I am actually reacting quite a bit to what other people say and do, and those reactions are not necessarily the best way to operate. And we start to see that this is how I create suffering, which is something happens in the world which is not according to my wishes and my expectations, and I try to either resist that and I respond in a way that makes the situation worse. All right, I either yell back at the person, or I shut myself down, and which makes me feel even worse than in the beginning. So it's
Hmm.
all about understanding what is going on in the beginning. So if you look at every uh, spiritual tradition, a lot of it is about self-learning. Know thyself. In I would say, like, maybe the Abrahamic religions, there's a lot of focus on know thyself, like trying to understand uh, me, which means my thoughts, my ego, my desires, my fears, all of the things that get me in a place of uh, some sense of excitement or resistance. Like I think it's about understanding how the mind responds to different situations, and seeing that there is a state where I am actually in a state of calmness and openness, but then there is another state where I'm in a state of contraction and in a state of bother. And once we have clarity that there are different states that are possible and that happen, then we can do something about it, and then we can start to see how those states come about, and how much of uh, this state being uncomfortable is something that I am adding to it. So what is my responsibility in making that state happen?
Hmm.
um, yeah, so self-learning, I think that's the sort of the theme of what where to begin, like. And so in order to learn about yourself, I think there is this process of getting sensitive. How do we increase our sensitivity to both our body, the different sensations that are happening on different parts of the body, as well as what are the kinds of thoughts that I am creating moment to moment. And given that we live in a world where it is so easy to get distracted, it's so easy to gratify ourselves by excessive sensual pleasures, the
Hmm.
sensitivity is hard to develop. It takes a lot of patience and desire to to build the sensitivity. And the reason I say that is because whenever something difficult happens in our life, our the patterns and the conditioning that we have is to move away from it and try to get away from it either by distracting ourselves or getting involved in some sort of sensual activity, like maybe eating something, or watching television, or speaking to even our friends to some certain degrees, where we are complaining about things, where it's always this expression of energy outwards, rather than like keeping that energy inwards and noticing what does it feel like to be in that state of trouble. And yeah, so I'm going to pause here.
Yeah, I really, really love how you started with self learning, because I believe that is the foundation of transformation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I started the journey, it's interesting. A lot of people assume that, okay, if you go into any of these traditions, you're walking into a new religion, is what a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people assume automatically, because it
Mm-hmm.
may be tied to certain traditions or tied to certain religions, right? Or over time it became that way. So, what's interesting to me is how you didn't start out by saying, well, come on to come and be a Hindu, or come and be a Buddhist, or come and be a Christian. Like, you didn't, it wasn't about like a religious belief. It was more
Mm-hmm.
about, let's learn about ourselves, which is just so beautiful to me, how you started with that.
Yeah, and it all starts with pain in some way. So, for me, I was potentially in a state of shock and depression in many ways, where I came to America from India, and I had certain expectations of what an American life would be. And some parts of it were satisfied, but there were other parts which were like, what else is there, right? Like, okay, there is this satisfaction of the emotional and maybe material aspects, but there's still something deep that's missing. And and that pain of not finding it was the sort of turning towards, okay, I want to learn more about why I'm suffering so much. And that self-learning journey began, which is like, okay, how do I, and I didn't know in the beginning that was what was happening, which is I was learning about ways in which I was creating suffering. Because a lot of it in the beginning is not knowing that there is a certain role that I'm playing in creating the suffering. And, it's in the beginning, it's like, oh, the world is doing it to me. I don't like the way the world is set up. Everything is so competitive, and like everybody is so abrasive. And so there's many reasons to find fault with the world. And and that's part of it. The learning is part of it, to say, okay, these things are true. The world is horrible, the world is corrupt, the world is very uh, abrasive in many different aspects, and that does hurt me. And so we start to learn ways in which how we respond to the world too, and that's part of the learning as well. And
Mhm.
then yeah.
Oh, no, I was going to ask you. So I know you grew up in a Hindu household. You've shared that before with me.
Hmm.
I'm just curious, how much of this did you know growing up? How much of this, all of, teachings of yoga and Vedanta and Buddhism, like how much of that were you exposed to growing
I mean,
up in that
nothing.
household?
Yeah, nothing.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I am fortunate to have grown up in a household where my parents were not religious in many. I mean, they were, religious on the surface level. We celebrated some festivals and holidays, but there was no enforcement of wanting to do any rituals and rites as a practice. Like many households would, do puja every day, or like even ask their children to pray, but like none of that was enforced from my parents. So from that sense, I got a lot of freedom to not be in dogma in many ways. And I always questioned why we did why we had to go to a temple, like why we had to like even visit some temples that my parents would take me to when I was a kid. And I would sometimes, I remember I used to be like, this doesn't make sense to me, I'm just going to wait outside while you guys do your thing. So, and they allowed me to do that, because I think my dad especially, he also had like that sort of scientific mind in some sense, which is to question
Mhm.
everything. And he
Yeah.
questioned things when he was younger too. So he understood that, you know, people generally have questions, and like you can challenge the status quo in many ways. And so that allowed me to like not really develop any beliefs, or especially from a religious perspective. Like I didn't have any um, conditioning in that sense. I was in fact conditioned to be atheist in many ways, to
Mm.
say that there is no such thing as God, and there's no such thing as like spirituality. People are like silly in like wanting to pursue that, because I didn't find anybody who could actually tell me why they were doing it. Like everybody's understanding, at least in the social circles and my, you know, family and relatives and who would speak about these things, they could never really give me a good answer. So, you know, it wasn't satisfying. And I was like, okay, if this doesn't make sense to you, I wouldn't want to pursue it. And so when I
Mhm.
came to America, that's when I actually encountered yoga. That's when I really encountered people who were actually doing it with the purpose of even understanding it, and not just doing it for the sake of doing it. I think that was the missing piece, where I didn't find anybody who could explain why they were doing it. um, and that was a huge piece for me, which is like my mind wants to know why I'm doing something. Like it doesn't make sense for me to just do it right blindly. um, yeah, so I remember like the first time I went to a yoga studio was, you know, in the Bay Area, and I was walking, and I suddenly saw all these people come out, and everybody was like like, you know, had this joy and happiness in their faces. And I was like, oh wow, this is very different than like, you know, going and walking across like some other place. And so I got curious, and, you know, I started talking to a few people there, and that's when I understood that they were doing, you know, yoga.
I love that sharing because a lot of people have, shared that yoga in the West is not the same as yoga in the East. And I've had the same experience, which you did. That was one place I would walk in, and you immediately feel a sense of joy, immediately feel allowed to feel whatever it is that you're feeling with no judgment. Like that's how I
Mm-hmm.
experienced when I walked into yoga studios.
Mm.
Um, but I guess, yeah, I can see where those who may have studied yoga maybe as a child in the East sees it a little differently, which it definitely has been commercialized. But to
Yeah.
throw the entire thing out the window, it just doesn't make sense to me, because
Right.
that is exactly where the seed got planted for me personally, walking
Mm.
into a yoga studio and doing the postures, holding the postures, being in shavasana, which people think it's easy. It's not easy
Mm.
to stay in shavasana and to fully let go and surrender. So, so as much as it looks like a physical practice, there's so much emotional and spiritual uh, connected to that each
Mm-hmm.
posture as you're holding it or as you're flowing through it, right?
Yeah, I think like the yoga in the West probably has a lot more emphasis on the physical asana part of it. But, you know, as you get into it, you realize that that's not the whole thing, right? Like there's these other aspects about getting sensitive and, you know, meditating and concentration. You know, there's 8 limbs. Like you start with one limb, and then like the other limbs open up for the people who want more, I suppose. And it's available. And yes, I think the real purpose of yoga is freedom. But it, I think the one thing that I wish was more ubiquitous is that understanding that yoga is not just to get physically, uh, you know, have a good physical
Have a
body, but
yoga
it's
body.
essential. Have a yoga body, yeah. uh, but it is more than that, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, and to that point, I think a lot of people shy away from going to the studios because people have this misconception of what a yoga body should look like, and only those people
Hmm.
should go and practice these postures. when it's really for everyone, because it's really not about getting physically fit, even though it becomes a byproduct of the practice, not
Hmm.
just because of the asana practice, but as you said, it's when you start questioning everything and start looking at the eight limbs as a practice for life, it does evolve even the way your physical body ends up experiencing this life, right? It does
Hmm.
transition. It kind of touches the physical, the emotional layer, all of it,
Right.
right?
Right. Like I think holding postures is a way of feeling the entire body in three-dimensional space, so you get more sensitive to like, wow, there's all these different parts of my body which I didn't like notice. Like, what does it feel like to feel my leg while I'm balancing, just on one leg, and the other leg is like in a different place. So uh, yeah, I think a lot of it is becoming aware and becoming sensitive. And if you have that understanding from the beginning, which is I'm going to do this to get more sensitive, then maybe the yoga practice can evolve and get more subtler and subtler as well. Um, well, I haven't done too much of physical asana because that was something that was like I have done it, but it's not a made majority of my practice. But I found that doing physical asana was very helpful for me to be able to sit longer, in single position, which is, you know, uh, becoming sensitive and being able to sit still for a longer period of time, which I think is also an important aspect of learning asana. It provides a sense of stability. It provides, the sense of like being fit, so that it is suited for the next stage, which is sitting still and like getting more and more sensitive to the other aspects of our experience, which is the thought world.
Mhm. Yeah. And one thing absolutely love about yoga postures, but before I even get into that, I sort of got into this path very similarly as you. I didn't start with yoga. I actually started with the Buddhist center, and
Hmm.
mostly breath meditation is where it all began for me. I
Hmm.
have a very analytical mind, and maybe we share that. Uh,
Hmm.
uh,
Right.
yeah, you start questioning everything that is happening that you believed once. So it does feel like you kind of feel groundless for a while because you've lost you lost your foundation that you once believed was the truth. And now you haven't found the new foundation. So you're like in this in between stage.
Hmm.
But even during that transition, I felt like the meditation practices, learning about the mind, learning about myself, it was making me feel okay with the groundlessness over time, believe it or
Hmm.
not.
Hmm.
Um, so as much as we should feel grounded, I think that's all beautiful, but there could be moments where we do feel groundless when we're starting the journey, because you're sort of being asked to let go of everything you know and clean your slate and then start over, and
Hmm.
that's scary, right? Like someone like me who grew up in Christianity, that has been taught about heaven and hell. um, when I went through the atheist stage, even then, the back of my mind, I'm judging myself, going, well, you're definitely going to hell if you're going down
Hmm.
this path, right? But
Hmm.
how do you what's the word I'm looking for, how do you uh you know resolve that conflict, like the conflict of, well, I have just way too many questions to fully accept this religion the way I was taught. But I also, the child in me is still fearing, what if like I'm going down this wrong path? So there's like this friction
Sure.
that I couldn't resolve for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, and then going through meditation is where I felt a bit centered, and knowing that, okay, it's a transition, that it's meant to take me somewhere, and to notice the mind, to sort of understand that these thoughts were creating the friction. just sort of
Hmm.
pause. And when I paused, I felt okay in that
Yeah.
moment. It was sort of trusting that path. Okay, I am feeling okay, which means it's a good thing. Let me keep
Hmm.
continuing to do
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm resonating with the fact that there is certainly periods of time in practice where the sense of groundlessness shows up, and in the beginning it can be extremely disorienting because there is nothing to land on, and our habitual tendency is to have the ground, right? Or like to basically like, oh, this is where I am. I want to feel safe, and so I need to create some sense of grounding. And most of the time, that sense of grounding is our identity coming through. I'm either a religion, identify as a Hindu or a Christian or whatever the religion is, or I identify as a particular political ideology, right? Like I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative, right? So there's some sense of like, okay, that's who I am, and yes, I can believe in those ideas that those ideologies provide, and I can identify with it. But when we start some of these insight practices, like they hit on the root, which is, oh, actually, those are mostly just thoughts and they're made up. And then we start to see that they're not really who I am. And those start to break up. And when those things start to break up, like it can feel extremely disorienting because we are so used to the feeling of identifying with something. And at some point, we start to maybe identify with the path itself, right? Like with, oh, now I'm a spiritual seeker. And so that provides some sense of grounding for a while. But then you start to see that, okay, even that's the same flavor of identifying, which is I'm now creating a different, maybe more pure identity in some ways. But
I
uh,
have something to share on that. So
yeah, go ahead.
when I started the Buddhist classes and started going to the yoga studio, I went through a phase where I refused to wear nail polish because I just kept telling myself, or even makeup, I'm like, no, I am a spiritual person, and spiritual people don't shouldn't like any of these things. Like I was creating this whole spiritual identity around everything I was doing. And I didn't realize how judgmental that can become also. Then you, because how you judge yourself is how you end up judging the world, right? So then
Hmm.
you meet people who may do those things, and automatically it's natural for, if we start identifying with anything, it's natural for us to judge the other person for doing those very things that we think is not right spiritually.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
love that.
that was an interesting season in my life.
Yeah, it's like the way you judge yourself is the way you judge other people, and the flip is also true, which is the way I judge other people is the way I judge myself. Because and at the end of it, the root of it is like you can only judge yourself. I think that's how, because like whatever you say or whatever I'm saying, I'm only really talking about myself. Like if I say the world is scary, it's not like the world is scary. It's like I think my image of the world is scary, right? And so I'm always talking about what I believe or what I think or what my understanding is of myself and the world in some degree, because the world is me, or the understanding of the world is my making. Uh, and yeah, so it's beautiful. It's like anytime anyone is having a conversation, like there was a time when I was like, oh wow, that's really revealing a lot about their worldview, right? Which is
Mhm.
their about themselves, and both positive and negative things. And
Yeah. And to touch up on what you were saying, where do we begin the practice? You started, with self-learning or self-study, and you
mhm.
mentioned how you started that journey was through meditation. But I also know, and you've shared in the other episodes, there's so many different ways to start the journey. Um, for some people whose mind is constantly running and they can't even sit still, would it be more beneficial to start with some type of physical body practice?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. I think that's why I think yoga is helpful, because it's putting you in a place of movement, but at the same time it's making you notice the different postures, right? So it's this combination of like what being aware of physicality, and in the same way I would say like dancing as well has that similar effect, but maybe because it is so focused on concentration, where I'm concentrating on learning the step, you may miss it. But I think if you come from a place of, oh, I want to learn about what it feels like to move, or what it feels like to hold this particular dance step, then there's this learning of things, and what ends up happening is that sensitivity starts to percolate into our day-to-day life. And
Mm.
when we have conversations with people where we feel a little triggered or agitated, we start to notice what does it mean to be triggered. Being triggered is just a word that I didn't like what is happening, but underneath that, what is our experience of the trigger? Is it that I have a uncomfortable sensation in my torso? Does it feel like I'm feeling hot? Am I feeling uh, like, has my heartbeat gone up? All of these things are part of the process of resisting what is happening. Um, and so as we sort of, if we are very body sensitive, then we can see that, okay, this is what is happening, and maybe there is acceptance of what's happening in the body, and so we no longer create like resistance towards the discomfort in the body, uh,
Mm.
and then we can be okay with what's happening in the world. The world is going to have many reasons for us to feel uh, that it's not okay. Like, the
Mm.
world is quite intense in many ways. There's a lot of suffering that we viscerally see every single day. I live in the Bay Area, and walking out, you see a lot of suffering on the streets. And so that's unavoidable. It's not like, yoga is going to make you in, somehow you're in a state of bliss all the time. Um, that is certainly not true. Like, you are going to experience suffering, maybe in many ways even more, because now there's nothing blocking perceiving the suffering. Like, in the past, I would try to maybe shy away from seeing obvious suffering, right? Like walking through a street where there's a lot of poverty. It is very hard to see that. And so in many ways, I remember I used to take a different turn to like maybe just not walk through like a lot of to avoid seeing a lot of homelessness on the street, because it was just very intense to be there. Uh, and and uh, and now it's like, okay, I can walk through it. I can have this sort of ability to be with the suffering, and maybe in some ways I try to send some sort of my goodwill and my uh, hope for a better future for everyone that I see. And so, but in that same light, I am not resisting what is being seen. um,
Mm.
and But that doesn't mean I don't feel the discomfort and I don't feel the suffering that I'm that everyone is experiencing. uh,
It's
but
a great.
it's like that. Yeah, there is this sense of freedom from, okay, I can allow it to happen, and it's something that is temporary, because this I'm walking through a street which is full of suffering, and it's going to pass, but there's no sort of like mental resistance towards it.
Mhm. I I really like that share, Puneet, because there are times, people will send me some videos of something happening in completely different parts of the world than the one that I'm
Mm-hmm.
living in. And, there would be chat groups where everyone is getting angry and frustrated, and some are crying about what's happening. And I remember a time I was very similar in that approach. I would get very frustrated, I would get angry, and I would say everything I need to say to whoever I am chatting with or talking to. And I came to a point where I noticed that I would get these, and I feel like this amazing sense of compassion, and sad,
Hmm.
yet not the same level of rage, anger, or frustration.
Hmm.
Um, I- and I wondered, and sometimes someone may look at me and say, well, why is she used to cry and she's not crying anymore about something like this?
Hmm.
And I've come to the conclusion or realization that it's like the first noble truth of Buddha.
Hmm.
Um, there is suffering, and once I fully embody, it's one thing to know something, but once you embody something, a truth, it kind of reflects out differently. And
Hmm.
I believe that may have happened, like even when, so for example, when something terrible happened to me in my life, I always used to go, why me, why would this happen? I would get angry. Now I'm not shocked or surprised, and a lot of
Hmm.
people have said this, like, why not me, why am I any special or unique,
Right.
right? Any other
Yeah.
human on the planet, right?
Yeah.
So when you see something happening to someone, in like completely different parts of the world, you see yourself in them, and you're like, yeah, this it's very sad. Um, but how do we take that energy and move it towards something that's beneficial
Hmm.
for ourselves and for everyone, right?
Yeah. Like my, one of my teachers that uh, whenever he notices suffering, one of the things he says is that, how can I be solution oriented? Because you cannot change what is. And so we have this perception of suffering, right? Which is in the now, there is this perception of maybe even not even suffering, but perception of pain. There is
Mm,
pain in this world, uh, where people are either feeling physical pain or mental pain, and because of like different uh, situations. And so how can I show up in a way that is not adding to the problem, is not adding to the pain? So like me saying that this is wrong, this shouldn't happen, is certainly a valid response, but I don't know if it is from a subtle thought world. We are adding more anger and we are adding more energy to this problem, right?
mhm,
Rather than bringing some sense of like resolution to it, which is this like sending out like more of peace and healing in the sort of subtle thought world. We are obviously need to take physical actions, like, and we can if we have the means to. So if we see somebody who is obviously in physical pain on the streets, there is a physical action that we could take to maybe give them some food and provide them some money to make their life a bit better. But like there is this, as we get more and more sensitive, there is not only physicality, there is also subtle inner world that exists. And most of the time that we start to notice ourselves, the inner world is actually the cause of the suffering in the outer world.
mm.
And so it starts to become more and more important to heal the inner world. And then we start to, maybe be more solution oriented, even when we encounter suffering on the street, to be able to send that sort of healing energy to the person who you might encounter, or you might read news on some website and feel really shocked. But then what is the response to that sense of feeling shocked? Is it to complain, or is it to be like, okay, this is terrible, let me send some healing energy to it, to this person?
Yeah, healing the inner world. That really does start with self-study, doesn't it?
Oh yes.
It's
uh,
everything. It's everything.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for those, yeah, there are some people who say sitting still and yoga, it's all boring.
Hmm.
Even if they are trapped in a pattern of, I don't want to say deep suffering, but a pattern of dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
Do you know anyone that had similar, understanding that this is boring and sitting with myself just seems boring? I
Yeah.
would rather, yeah, just listen to positive self-talk and
Hmm.
and uh, or just go at it like in a forceful manner to overcome whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly the mind that wants to have like ecstatic experiences, right? Like that's what gives it to me. And so there are ways to do that, right? There's a lot of like movement practices that sort of trigger energy flow in the body, and like you start to feel like better than what you did before you started the practice, right? So we are always trying to do something that makes us feel better coming out of it, right? And if that doesn't happen, then there is this feeling of like boredom or dissatisfaction or disappointment that this practice isn't really giving it to me. And for the most part, uh, meditating and will bring up past unconscious discomfort that we didn't know we had, and that doesn't feel good, and we want to resist that, and so we move away from it, right? And a lot of people may not have the I would say like the stamina, maybe in some ways the mental stamina to be able to deal with those discomfort. So which is why I think like body movement practices might be more helpful for those kinds of minds, where you can kind of use the body's intelligence to resolve some of those discomfort emotions. So I think like pranayama is like another practice where you're viscerally breathing and you're allowing the breath to move energy throughout the body. um, there's ecstatic dancing where you're really shaking and moving, and just that releases a bunch of obviously good energy, but then at the same time there's like trapped stuff in the body that comes out and gets resolved by just like shaking a lot. um,
Mm.
there's yeah, there's obviously yoga as well. uh, yeah, so
I'm,
there are
I'm
different practices that use the body as a way to resolve stored energy and stored trauma.
I'm seeing a lot of somatic healing therapists lately, and
Hmm.
yoga studios are starting to also offer a lot of that. And then the other one is EFT, uh,
Hmm. I've heard of
emotion
EMDR.
technique.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. hmm And there's, I think it's like tapping. I haven't tried.
Right.
I only tried it once, but
Yes.
yeah, different modalities. And what I'm hearing when you say that is really it's the intention. It's not so much, I'm gonna go do a hip hop dance just to release something. It's the intention. Like, well, why am I doing it? Uh,
Hmm.
because if you're just going to start, for example, if you're just going to start learning a dance to perform on a stage, that's wonderful. But if you are doing it for validation with not wanting to connect with yourself, kind of miss the point, right? Would you say?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
absolutely. I think it's important to know that there is a purpose to what I'm doing, right? And there's like something that I'm trying to get out of it. Um, and I'm just not doing it for entertainment. I think that's the main thing. Like if you're just
Mm,
looking at it as a way of distraction, then it's not going to be efficacious to really resolve the underlying issue. But if you're looking at it as a way to get curious about what is going on, and being able to stay with the body, or stay with our experience of life, I suppose, um, then there might be some understanding. And there is no
mhm,
like clear, like there's no one answer fits all, right? Like everybody is resisting life in very unique ways. And the reasons for resisting life is also very unique. There might be some unresolved past trauma that is not allowing us to be in the body, right? Like there's the body has essentially is a storehouse of experiences, and if some experiences are corrupt because of certain traumatic experiences, then the body is not going to feel good. It's going to feel like there is this we spoke about restlessness, so there's that underlying restlessness in the body that's trying to resolve itself, but we need to give it space and freedom for that underlying restlessness to express itself and flower and die. um,
mhm.
And so, dancing can be a way to do that. But if we are only aware, I mean, if you're paying attention to the body, so it's all about where is our attention? Is it in the now, which is in some ways, is it in reality, which is the body, the five senses, or is it in a thought constructed world, which in yoga, which we call unreality. Anything that is thought constructed is a dream, right? We are
Mm.
essentially in the dream world. So we want to be very aware of whether I'm dreaming right now or whether I'm in reality. And dancing and somatic practices are helpful because they move us to like reality. They move us into the body, and so our perception is always up in the now. Whereas in meditation, very often we get lost in the thought world, and so we get lost in unreality. So which is why we can either be highly entertained by the stories we create, or we can start to get a little bored, right? And so, yeah, but at the end of the day, we have to get to a place where it feels okay to be in the now, uh, right? And like all of our past traumatic experiences have been resolved to some degree.
Agree.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
being okay with the now, that's the practice.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then yeah, I think the other once that happens, then the second part of our learning begins, which is what are my underlying beliefs that I am
Mm.
operating with.
Which is
Um,
what scares everyone to to
yeah,
begin, because that's like it takes a lot of courage to walk into this groundless path and eventually to find the ground, uh, which is life transforming, though, in my opinion. It really gives you a completely different way of experiencing life, so much presence, that comes with joy and just love. It's such a different experience, and it just takes that courage, I think, to step onto this path.
certainly it's a hero's path, which is not which means that there's going to be a lot of villains that you will have to encounter and conquer in if you have ever played like video games. But there's
Yeah.
also the one thing that's coming to my mind is when you said there is a fear of being groundless. But then what actually at least in my experience, what has happened is it's okay with the groundlessness, right? We start to realize that there was a belief that I needed to be grounded. Like that is a
Mm.
belief too. And that's something that we have been conditioned to believe as human beings, that you need to identify with something, you need to have a ground, right? And then to see that actually the creation of the ground too, in many ways, is an escape from reality. It's like going into this, because a ground is just an idea, it's just something I identify with. The fact that I'm okay with just this now, which has no thought, in the sense that there is no identification, is okay too. It is scary. It is a very new place to be, but as you start to settle into that place, you'll start to see that yes, there's this more presence, there's more opening, there is more simplicity. I guess in the end, like life becomes very simple, very ordinary, yet very profound. Um, and fresh and new, so that there is this newness that's
Yeah.
constantly happening because there is no set place from which I'm operating from, right? Like we are just looking at every experience fresh, and so yeah, life becomes very beautiful in that sense.
What came to mind when you shared that is being grounded in the groundlessness. It's like an
Mhm.
oxymoron, right? Yeah, that's
Yes,
the practice.
absolutely. uh, and maybe we can end this session by just doing a short meditation that may be giving a taste of what it means to be groundless.
That would
Okay.
be wonderful. Thank you, Puneet.
All right, let's close our eyes and make sure you're in a comfortable position. You can either sit or lie down here. And start by taking a few breaths. Notice if there's any tension in any parts of the body. And if there is, just breathe into that part of the body. And then on the exhale, you can imagine releasing that tension. You want to do that a couple more times. As you breathe in, just notice different parts of the body, starting from the top of the head and slowly making your way down to your face, the back of your head, to your neck, your shoulders. A good analogy here is you can think of water flowing down due to gravity on your body, on the surface of your body, and slowly permeating the entire surface of your body. There's this flow that's just moving downwards gently and automatically. And you can notice that you're in a state of observation of this flow. If you reach the end of your body, the soles of your feet, you can take a deep breath and then start again. Just gently imagine this cup of water on the top of your head and just flowing down. You can use your breath, the exhale, as a force that is making the water flow down. Now that you might have a more, you can say, defined structure of the body, maybe different parts of the body. You can feel your feet, maybe touching the floor, the back, the top of your head. There's this perception of your body in three-dimensional space. It might just feel like sensations, maybe the feeling of clothes on your skin. Those sensations are making up your body. Without those sensations, perhaps you might not notice that you even have a body. So these sensations have always been there, and we're just taking time to notice them and become more aware that they are happening. We're getting more sensitive to it. So throughout your day, there is always this opportunity to come back to this body by just noticing what are the different sensations that are happening, or different sensations that you can feel in this moment. And these sensations might be moving around, could be changing. It's kind of this vibrating mass of sensations. Okay? As we come out of this meditation, just take a few more deep breaths. And as you start to open your eyes, just notice if you can still feel some sensations on the surface of your body that you can carry with you when you go about your day. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Puneet.
Thanks, Sunny.